Let me know, how long have you been into RC crawling? I have personally been in it long enough that this really old Fastlane machine SPV2 chassis is not only new old stock, but something that I would never run today. I'm John Holmes with Holmes Hobbies. Thanks for tuning in today. I found this old chassis online and just had to pick it up. This was made by Fastlane Machine, which is literally just located down the road a couple of hours in St. Louis from me. And the reason why it's kind of special to me is that I kind of helped them get this started and also gave the industry a little push at the same time. Just kind of helped them with the geometry, narrow it down, let them know, hey, what widths you need to do. This was the 55 millimeter standoff width version, which was pretty much an aftermarket hop-up for the Bender chassis. They also had the 65 millimeter version, which worked with the stock skid plate that came with the AX10 at the time. So there was a couple of those, but I don't even know which one ended up being the more popular one. Now, the reason why I feel this is significant, at least in the comp crawler scene, which I know most of you probably never participated in, and you may have never even seen a comp crawler in real life, but this was the departure from regular TVP chassis, which, you know, more or less, this is a twin vertical plate chassis, or TVP. And what it did is, instead of having a body on top, well, you could have a tuber. In our competition classes, and I read the rules and realized that, well, you could have a chassis that was a TVP, but also had the same specs as a tuber, and you could kind of slide underneath the radar on the rules and not have to run a body on a TVP. And it got a lot of grumbles in the industry, or, you know, in our comp scene, at least at the time. And for probably good reason, it ended up changing things in the long run. But what we have today for our TVP tuber, is what they ended up calling them, was essentially this sort of setup, to where we have our main chassis plates, if you will, and these are, I think, 2 millimeter or 1.5 millimeter carbon, real thin, real flexible, and by themselves, if it was just, you know, two single plates like this, it wouldn't survive a crash, no way, no how. But the guys figured out, and this is a RC Bros Executioner chassis, they figured out that if you used thin carbon, that you could pretty much sandwich multiple layers. You could get your minimum width that you needed for your competition spec, you could get your length, you could get your height, but all of the plates didn't have to be all of those dimensions at the same time. So as you can see on this side camera here, let me get this sucker in view, that we have some standoffs that separate the outside from the inside at multiple locations, and it just creates this really neat, really stiff sandwich sort of rig. And you know, it did change the competition side of things from that point forwards, and we ended up consolidating a lot of the specs so that we didn't have multiple specs to run off of, and over the years they just became smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, the reason why I say I would not run this SPV2 chassis these days is that the geometry on it, and you hear me talk about geometry very often when I'm doing the test rigs outside, is that the geometry just has a terrible roll center. It has really bad anti-squat. It just doesn't climb very well. You get to a side hill and it really wants to unload your axle and flip you over. The body roll is really extreme. It's what we had to work with, what, 10, 12 years ago or so. At the time, it was great. It was leading edge at the time, but certainly today, I think I'm going to just keep this in the package for good old time's sake. I'm certainly not going to be converting my motor on axle comp rig over to this old design, because let's face it, it would be a big step backwards. As cool as this guy looks, there's still knockoffs. You can actually find knockoffs of this today from Integy and another Chinese company, but they have worse geometry. They copied it, and they did a worse job at the geometry. I don't know how you can possibly do that, but when you don't know crawlers and you're just copying parts, sometimes you don't understand the nuances of how something is made. So if you want something that's like this, it's not going to perform, but you can still find them online. I forget what they call them, like rock racer chassis or you know, something like that, just trying to sell them these days, because I'm sure they made 1,000 and they probably sold 100 in the first year and then have been sitting on the rest the entire time, because the market moved fast. Competition crawlers move really fast. And that's something that large manufacturers don't do a good job of keeping up. They want to make big volumes. They want to sell them for many years and not have to change things. And we certainly saw over the years the competition scene kicking out all of the bigger manufacturers one by one. And little, cottage industry guys would take the torch and every single year make little improvements. And the big guys say, that's more work than I want to be in because I don't compete myself. So when you don't have that kind of drive, it's really hard to keep up with the little guys who have the drive, they have the time, and they move really fast. When you only make 10 chassis at a time, or 20, or even 100 chassis at a time, you can move really fast and have version after version after version. A lot of what we've done in some of our competition motors as well. It's kind of just, how things work, I suppose. But I think that's probably enough ranting about this cool old chassis that I'll probably never run. Do you have any old parts laying around that you just can't get rid of, but at the same time you're never going to run them again? If you do have any questions about it though, or the meaning of life, or the meaning of crawling, or what is a competition crawler, teach me more, then leave a comment down below. As you can see, this one is nice and dusty. There's not a lot of 2.2 competitions these days, so it doesn't get as much use as we should, but c'est la vie, such is life sometimes. I've got plenty of other toys to play with. So what is the oldest part that you have for, let's just say, RC cars in general, or specifically RC crawlers? I think my oldest rig is gonna be either this guy, which was the Bastard Junior chassis from RCP Crawlers, or it's gonna be this guy, which was the Recluse from RCP Crawlers. Both of them probably well over a decade old at this point. Thanks for tuning in today, and have a good one.